passed on Wednesday. And that night was the first memorial at the gardens at Pearson Street. This was 4 days later. And it was a pretty incredible scene. This was a fairly large pond that I had no concept that we could circle. And the people just kept streaming in. And eventually this whole pond was circled. It was quite an experience. And that, at the end, is a teepee that I believe he stayed in at some time. Or that was up on the land.
Well, for that particular event, that was a story teepee where people afterwards could come and share stories about Frank.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, Chris, let's move it on to the next one. Quarter of the lake. And then we're going to show you another shot of another quarter of the lake with more people just ringing this whole thing. Out there in the center, some people came out and made some presentations, including Seven Song, who came down. People were from California, from Colorado, from New Jersey, really from all over the map. And this was a memorial that they produced for Frank that overlooked the lake and had a heck of a story to tell just in the items that were around. Anything else you guys want to talk about? And here we have Frank saying goodbye to us all for the future, for us to try and carry on some of the things that he was working on. And we're going to now come back and talk about a couple of his projects. One that I had and passed on to Marc was Plants and Healers of India and Nepal. And he produced this after his trip to India. Frank had a very serious situation in India where he got very sick, and he went to the Dalai Lama's personal physician just by happenstance, and he got cured. He never really found out what they cured him with or what he had, I think, but it was very serious, and they thought that he was not going to make it. That was one of the times that he had some very close encounters with a near-death experience, I would think. The other story that I love to tell about Frank is when he's walking with two Israelis in Africa, and they came up to him and with knives at their throats, took his backpack, cut his backpack, and was gone before he could say anything but my passport. And he spent a full week at the U.S. Embassy trying to get that back. This is his PhD thesis. Master's thesis, rather, sorry, from the Schumacher Institute. College. And hopefully this will be reprinted by the foundation that Ken and his family are going to start. So the last publication that Frank was talking about, and this happened in England, started in England, and Schumacher got to be one of the places where they did some of the work on this in the very early time. And the Transition Handbook, From Oil Dependency to Local Resilience by Rob Hopkins. This is a very important book and takes us to a place where the momentum of Frank's death could accelerate the pace that we go, using this book as an example, to a better situation for humans, but also for the plants. Plants are very much stressed. The air quality is bad. The global warming isn't happy for them. And we need to really turn this about. And this is one of the ways, not looking at government, but doing it from the ground up. Now, any comments from any of you all on this book? Goodheart, I know we talked about it before.
Yeah, I've read it once or twice. I actually got it from Frank probably last year, or the first time he had books with him, and it's a good book. It certainly maps out a way for communities to begin to address this transition from abundant, cheap fossil fuel that's allowed us to do all sorts of foolish things and move into a more sustainable direction.
Yeah, I liked his term of resilience rather than sustainability. And just recently I was talking to Chuck Marsh, and he likes regeneration. I think sustainability has been overused now, and we're declaring it on this show. And we need to go to resilience. We need to have a resilient economy with local businesses and local ways of moving about through biofuels that works for us and allows us not to go into that crazy period between the two different phases of coming out of oil and going into resiliency without it being a stress-filled time for everybody. And North Carolina is perfectly situated with small towns, because it's a small town experience where the resiliency seems to be able to be the strongest. And we as citizens need to come and bring back sane decision-making from our local elected officials, but also from all of the administrative people who are still on the old path that think that we are just going to get over this little hump and we're going to be right back where we were. And that is just such an illusion, and all of the corporate world is pushing that illusion without, I think, a clue as to how this crash is going to come about, other than they're just trying to get as much money as possible before it happens, it seems.
Yeah.
Zev, any...
Oh, yeah. There have been many analogous situations to the one that we're in now throughout human history, and starting with ancient Mesopotamia and the inhabitants there deforesting the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and potentially causing the great flood that's referred to in all of the ancient writings through deforestation. And there are many other examples through China and India and South America and Central America. Everywhere you look, people have gotten to a point where we've overtaxed the topsoil and the ecosystems that we depend on. And then there's a critical moment at which we can either adapt to that in a way in which humans become an interdependent, positive part of the ecosystem, or it can descend into violence and resource grabbing and even more destruction on ecosystems. And so the key word in this book is transition, and that we are about to move from one type of life to a radically different type of life, and it's about whether that's enjoyable and smooth or is a big mess. And so one thing Rob Hopkins lays out in this book, kind of the where the rubber hits the road of how we can get down in our communities, and actually he lays out the processes by which little villages and communities and groups of people can slowly but determinedly build towards regenerative living.
And
which is good.
Yes, which is great, and is the direction we want to go. Rob Hopkins is on TED, and we would encourage you to go to capital TED or capital T, capital E, capital D.org, and look at the 10 or 15 minute kind of YouTube situation that they have. explaining the book and hopefully getting everybody a little bit closer to purchasing it. I do know that Amazon.com has this book right now, and there's some free shipping, but they also have some places where you could go to get a used book if you don't necessarily need a new book. Those are the ways of now moving into 2010 to start your year off. This book is the book that will lead my hopefully community in Marshall to start this process in January. And we hope that everybody's going to get off on a good foot with this. And I'm sure that these gentlemen at this table are going to be some of the people who are going to help this system move forward and get away from our corporate lobbying our legislators to do things that were the past and are no longer appropriate for this future that we're looking at around the corner.
Well, something I guess I would just chime in really quick is to say it's already been alluded, we're really just scratching the surface in Frank's work, and especially with his work in California, this is definitely a more Appalachian focused with a little bit of his world travels. Frank also wrote a number of children's books that are hopefully going to be available soon. Doug Elliott has been contacted to illustrate some of these, and he also wrote a book about his travels in Peru and Ecuador. He was very close with finishing up a book about his travels in Africa. So if you're very interested in this, as we are, and many other hundreds, if not thousands of people around the world are, there's a number of ways that you can get in contact for further information. Plantsandhealers.com is Frank's website. He also has a page on Facebook that you can look him up by. He also has a number of YouTube videos where you can see him teaching. And would just like to encourage you to keep this work going. There are many, many, many threads that Frank started that are being carried forth now by various individuals in various different places. And please keep in touch and do your part to help with that work. And
if you are part of the network that got contacted about this show happening Christmas Eve on Thursday at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and want to, obviously we would love if you taped it and showed it around. We are on public access, that's what we would like to do. But we're also going to have this reshown that same week. The shows are not archived. You can eventually get a copy of these shows through the Frank Cook Foundation. They'll be available, and we would encourage his community to now step up to the plate and take some responsibility to carry on some of his work, either with the Transition Handbook or Botany in a Day, to continue that work, as well as finishing up some of his work in Africa in his quest to try to touch base with every plant family on the planet. And I think on a certain level he has probably done that. There may be some small plants that he hasn't seen or in certain places, but he has seen a great deal of them. And we encourage everybody to want more information to please contact this show, and we'll pass it on. That's Robert at ncgoldenseal.com. Just put in the subject matter, Frank Cook television show, and we'll pass it on to the proper people and keep everybody in the loop. Because if nothing else, Frank Cook was a networker. He was a networker that we all should emulate if that is part of our personality, if we want to network. It's a constantly labor-intensive operation, but the joy and the getting back from the work that he did was part of his life. Frank, as his brother said, kind of turned away from the corporate world, credit cards, telephones, anything that really had a trapping to the financial system that we're dealing with. And the only time that he really started to think about money is when he wanted to get a trip together, and he had to get these funds to do this. But other than that, money was not the first of his criteria in his life. And it is something that I admire greatly in his work.
And definitely one of Frank's greatest known sayings, I think, in all of his teaching was to come and take what you need, give what you can, give what you can, and take what you need. And so he was always willing to offer his services for free if that was what was necessary to get the job done, and would allow people to kind of from within decide what they're able to contribute. And it always worked out for him. It mystified many, but it always worked out for him. And I just encourage that plantsandhealers.com, his website, is a great way for you to learn much more about the stories, much more about the work, and figure out what your place might be within that.
Yes, and we welcome you to the community of plant lovers that we represent. And if you're just new to this network, we embrace you. And as they say in the Rainbow Gathering, welcome home. Because this is where we need to be to get through the next trying times. I guess the big word for everybody coming up is challenging. And how we can get through this, and how the plants can survive in a way to help us with our medicine, with our food. And the very first conference that Frank had out at Eagle Feather Farm, which he named, was a conference called Food is Medicine and Medicine is Food, from I think it was Greek, that and we're probably paraphrasing the actual Greek words. But it's not a new concept. It's a new concept to us because we've been fed the corporate monoculture society of growing our food from the very diverse plant crops that we need to bring in the beneficials and to have less problems with our insect friends and our bacteria and our fungi. Anything else, Steph?
Well, yeah, I mean, the plants, you're talking about plants, us taking care of plants, and plants have weathered a lot harder times than these times in the evolutionary past, and that's one of the things I remember learning from Frank a lot during his teaching, is when we would sit down next to this plant, he would kind of wave his hand and this plant would appear on the ground that I hadn't noticed before, it would seem, and then we would sit down and talk about the old evolutionary past of the plant, and how it had descended from many generations of beings who had survived in many different types of conditions. And this is, one of the prime principles of permaculture, is paying attention to the way other life forms have succeeded and then imitating them. And a thing that I learned from Frank was looking at and listening to the languages of plants to try to learn about how we can survive and thrive. And I think that that's what we all here are about, though we haven't gotten to talk about it in much detail today, and encourage people who are watching to contact us or read books about it, because there's a whole universe out there about ways that we can thrive.
Goodheart, anything?
Well, you mentioned fun guy, and of course Frank was a fun guy. He was the best kind of Pied Piper. It was hard not to want to be around him. It was hard not to want to follow him and put your arm around his shoulder and just go off in the woods. And you know, a lot of us did that every opportunity we
You have to
had.
be tall to put your arm around
Yeah,
his
yeah,
shoulder,
put your arm around his waist, because he
Right.
wasn't, besides a fun guy, he was a tall guy. And, you know, one thing that has really struck me with his passing is that there's not going to be any replacement for Frank Cook. We got a lot of good people around. There's be a lot of good people coming through, but there won't be another Frank Cook. So it's a loss for all of us. And, you know, a wonder in our lives that we had access to him and loved him actively, and we got to be with him for so long. And he's irreplaceable.
But one of the things that Frank taught at the last permaculture gathering, we might as well give a plug for that, one of the places he came every single year, in a very creative way, he asked people to come into the garden and just pick weeds. Those weeds, he showed, could be food for people. And this, we had, from 10 to 20 weeds each person, kind of averaging around 12 to 15 that we had that we could eat. And the lack of fear that he tried to instill in everybody was that you don't have to fear not having food, because the plants are there, even in the form of weeds, which we have never figured out how to stop or control, and thank goodness for that. That we now have a body of knowledge that says, from Bob Marley, you know, don't worry. This is all going to pass, and we're all going to do well if we just become aware of what is in our surroundings, especially the plant world. And if you want to just get anywhere close to a decent plant, sit down there, stare at it, and just do a mental trip with the plant, and you will be amazed at what you can learn from an experience like that. And that was a typical kind of thing that Frank would get people to do. And it was just a wonderful situation where he would come and share all of this plant knowledge. And for Frank, even those little kids that he took care of for a couple of years in California, he would go out with them, and the mom and dad were amazed at what these kids would bring back as far as not only plants but knowledge that Frank instilled in these little children. And it was really very heartening to understand how he could bridge so many oceans, even though many people would, just from his appearance, be turned off by what he was saying until they started to hear him, and then the appearance didn't even matter. What he was talking about was truth, and truth just hits your heart. And Frank knew how to do that better than probably anybody that I've encountered in the last 20 or 30 years. He just knew how to get to that place plants and people come, and how to communicate that to a group of people is truly amazing. And again, you know, it didn't matter whether you had 5 people or you had 50 people. The talk was exactly the same. And he was an amazing person on his plant walk. Mark, any last words before we wrap this up?
Gosh, it's really surreal to be here right now. It hasn't really, you know, it just doesn't, it's hard. But there is a lot of hope, I feel like, in what we can do moving forward into the future. And I have heard of numerous people being visited by Frank since his passing from physical form. He's definitely still here with a lot of people that are still connected to him and sending things through. And there's a lot of children that Frank touched in his time. He never personally fathered a child, but he helped raise a number of them. And so they will represent that next generation of hope as well. And just give so much thanks to you, Frank, for all the inspiration that you've given to so many people.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to me we've had some deer coming very close to my house for the first time. And I swear one of those deers is Frank. He just wouldn't move, you couldn't shake him, just stared at you eye to eye. Beautiful whitetail. And I just felt Frank's energy in that deer, which is a very apropos animal for him, I think.
The day after he passed, I went out into my garden wanting to make a memorial mead, like I think a lot of us probably did for Frank. And I asked the plants in the garden, if you want to be included in this, just get my attention. And they did. And I've got that batch in secondary fermentation right now. Probably going to be in fermentation in the bottle for about another year and a half before I serve it to our community of friends. And I imagine, again, a lot of the other herbal mead makers in the area have done something real similar.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because here we've got a mead that I think it would be appropriate to share, and this is a pear mead from a tree that Frank showed me in Hot Springs, and certainly that's a big legacy for Frank and a big thing for people to spread around the world. It's really transformed our culture here in Asheville to have the process of mead making be lived into. And well over 100 plants that we use in various different formulations. And this bottle has been filled 4 times and has the energy of many, many people from circles that we've had with Frank and with others. And it's certainly a really great way to live through that legacy. I know that there's also, kraut that Frank made and tinctures that Frank made and all these things that have been instilled with his energy that are cherished by our community now, and that we parcel out at special occasions such as this one, and can continue to live into the life of Frank Cook in the here and now, even if his physical form is not with us.
In the last mead show that we had, Zeb was on, and we shared some mead that time. So I think it's appropriate. We have a couple of more minutes. Might as well open it up and share this here on URTV as we close down this 1-hour tribute to Frank Cook and his life as an herbalist, as a traveler, as a healer, as a teacher. Frank taught in many different ways, including the way that we remember of him teaching about stones in the body at Earth Haven when he had some earth, some stones that he had to pass, and his trauma. Learned about that through his suffering. It was almost Christ-like in some ways. So I applaud him on his journeys. And we wish him the best of luck in wherever he goes.
We love you, Frank.
Yeah, we sure do.
A drink to that.
Hey.
For sure. Frank.
Hey, to Frank and all of us in this work.
Frank alive in all of us. Carry on.
Yeah. So those who are now got an inspiration, follow it through, and know that there's a family out here that does want to connect with you all. Do take that opportunity. Let us know where you are, and we will be in contact. This is really, in some ways, just the beginning.